everyone. Thank you for joining our small group discussion session for day 2. So today, these small group discussion sessions are more topic specific. Yesterday, the small group discussions we offered were really by persona for moms or dads, but this session is open to anyone. And the topic at hand today is college and pursuing a career. And we could not have a better speaker to be presenting and sharing about important tips and information to be aware of in that area for our FOP community than our very own Laura Rossano. So I'm just going to do a brief housekeeping to say that if you have questions, Laura has prepared a wonderful presentation for all of you today. And so she's kind of going to be going through that. And if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. And we will likely hold them till the end unless it's very on topic with what Laura's speaking to at the moment. But we will have time at the end for Q&A. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Laura. So Laura is a certified rehabilitation counselor who specializes in transition age youth. And she's going to be talking today about her work as a vocational evaluator and some of the knowledge she has from that job, which she and I agree is really important to carry over and share with our FOP community. So Laura, take it away.
Okay, I am going to actually share my screen with all of you. That way I have a little slideshow prepared. So let me get that up. Okay, play from start. So today, as Hope had said, I'm kind of going over navigating adulthood and what comes next when it comes to college, graduate school, careers, and the path. This is my particular journey. There's no right or wrong answer of how we did it. It's just what worked for me. I want this, though, to be a discussion today. I am open to any type of questions. I don't want it to be such a structured format. So if you have any questions, like Hope said, please put them in the chat. If I don't answer that question right away, I will definitely get to it at the end. But I just want it to be an open and honest dialogue, and that's really what I'm coming from. So going forward, that's me. My name's Laura. I'm 33 years old. I live on Long Island. My career is a vocational evaluator. I currently have a master's degree. Some of my favorite things, I love a glass of wine, especially rosé. I get my nails done every 3 weeks like clockwork. I am a complete shopaholic, and I've been married for 3 years now. So that's my husband, Edward, on the bottom. And of course, we're at a vineyard because why not? There's definitely a wine theme going on here. And then going into my support system, I found a quote I thought was fitting: having somewhere to go is home. Having someone to love is family, and having both is a blessing. And on the one screen, I have my parents, Anthony and Barbara. I have my brother, Mark, my sister-in-law, Shauna, and their 3 daughters, my nieces. They're here today. They're 7, 5, and 3. At the bottom, I have Maddie and Amelia with Edward making a funny face. I have the girls kind of laying on top of me and Edward on the couch. And then the bottom picture I have is of Amelia in my wheelchair. And I purposely put that picture up there because I think for a long time, I was always worried about the perception of the wheelchair and how it was going to follow me when I went into college and when I went to graduate school and eventually landing a job, and the perception of what it was going to be. And when it came to my nieces, I was always worried, was it going to just be a scary thing, or what was going to happen? And actually, it was Amelia's birthday, and she had gotten a little pocketbook that had fake keys in it. And it had a little clicker on it that would make a noise like it was an unlocking a car door and locking a car door. And Amelia took that, and it was, the wheelchair was her new car. So that she would make a little noise, she would sit up on it, pretend she was driving it. And that's what the wheelchair was to Amelia. It was nothing more than that. It was a fun car to drive. And when we're outside, the girls always like to sit on my lap. I think they can drive the wheelchair better than I can half the time. And it really put it into perspective to me. And it was a quick little story. It was the girls' birthdays, and one of their friends had asked my brother about the wheelchair. And I always love when people ask questions. I want you to ask questions if you're curious. And my brother got down on her level and was explaining it to her. And Maddie, my 5-year-old niece, says really excited, and we get to drive it, totally oblivious that, well, why was she even asking questions? To her, it was just part of the norm. And a couple of weeks later, I had Amelia on my lap and we were outside driving, and she was in charge of the joystick. And I said, "Oh, I said, your friend was asking daddy about the wheelchair the other day." And she stopped dead, turned herself to me and looked at me quite assertively and said, "Well, what did she want to know?" And it was in that instant that I realized she didn't want to know anything. It was, to Amelia, this is normal. And that's how it is throughout my life. And I think it might have taken a 7-year-old to make me realize that, but I'm still so much more. I'm an aunt, I'm a friend, I'm a colleague, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, and I'm a wife. Those are the words that describe me. So now that you kind of know a little bit about me, and all of these people on the screen have pretty much been the reason why I am where I am today, I'll take you back and we'll pretend that it's 2007 and I am about to graduate high school. And going back, I graduated from a small public high school that had about 85 kids in the graduating class. And when I was a senior, it's pretty much when you get to have an idea of what it is that you're interested in doing and what career you want. And that's where a lot of the honest conversations happen. And I knew that given my limitations and the restrictions that I had, I wasn't going to be able to do whatever it was that I wanted to do in life. I had to be smart about it. And there were a lot of hard conversations that I had with my parents, with my brother. And, I wanted to be a lawyer from a very young age. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I could probably talk to anyone here. I can argue my point, for anything. But realistically, was it the right step for me? Educationally, of course I could do it, but the grueling hours, the 70-hour work weeks, early mornings, late nights, it wasn't something that I could physically handle. And it was just the start of those conversations. So when I was a senior in high school, I learned that I loved creative writing. I loved to write. I got into poetry. And I'm like, this is something I could do. So we started to look at colleges that had that as a career path. Of they had good English programs and creative writing. So that was the first kind of checkbox. The next thing was, I knew I was going to need round the clock care, because currently I just had my parents, I had my brother. We didn't have anyone in place to help. And I did want to go away to school. And as much as I wanted to take my mom away with me, I couldn't take my mom away with me. So we needed to find someone. And if you know me, I don't like change. So developing a new normal was definitely, it was scary, but it was something that it was a growing process. And it also came to where distance was important. Whereas my brother went 4 hours away to school, but realistically, was I able to go 4 hours away? No, I needed to stay close enough and far enough. So if there was an emergency, an hour was pretty much my limit, where my parents could get to me within an hour if something happened. So I narrowed it down. And it was also the beginning stages of me becoming my own advocate. Because when I go away to school, again, I'm not going to have my parents there to talk on my behalf and handle all of the things in my life. I was going to have to do it. And that's when I really did start to develop my voice, when I was a senior, because you're getting ready for the next step. You're entering adulthood. It's really the first thing that you do. And my parents were always really good and had always encouraged me to speak up for myself and do things, and they were always going to be there. But I was in charge of the show now. And I then had a decision to make. I decided where I was between two schools. a private university on Long Island, 20 minutes away from my home, Hofstra University, or a Catholic university about an hour away without traffic, Fordham University. And they were both great English programs, great creative writing programs, great educations, but what was the one that was going to work for me? And I remember I went with my parents. We went to Fordham first because I was leaning more towards Fordham. And we met with the person in the disability office. And I remember I said, well, what dorm would I be in? And she said, oh, well, you have to stay in the same dorm for the 4 years because we don't have any other dorms that are accessible. There is only a certain one that's accessible. So I said, well, what if my friends are in a different dorm? She said, oh, they're going to have to come to your room. So I said, okay. And then she said, but you'll get priority when scheduling classes. So I said, oh, that's good. She said, well, yeah, because certain buildings aren't accessible. So I said, but what if a class that I wanted to take was in a different room that wasn't accessible? Well, we would try to move it, but we couldn't make any guarantees. So I thought, okay. And then if you know Fordham, there's also another campus, the Rose Hill campus, and there's a shuttle that takes you back and forth. And I said, well, what about the shuttle if I had to go to the Rose Hill campus? She said, oh, no, that's not accessible. So I felt like I was hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And I was so discouraged when I left the school. And my parents had said, first thing, if this is what you want and you want to fight for every single thing, we will fight with you. But let's look at Hofstra. And I was definitely more resistant because it was only 20 minutes away from me. And I guess in my head as a 17-year-old graduating, it was just too close. But I did. And for one thing about Hofstra, it's a national arboretum, it's a statue garden, it's a beautiful campus. And actually the bridge in the pictures, the Unispan, it attaches the academic life. And then if you go over it, you're on the residential side. And when I went, we met with the disability office and I asked the same questions, what dorm would I be in? And she looked, she said, well, any dorm you want, but we would recommend you were in this particular dorm because it's closest to the dining hall in case for bad weather. I said, so I can get to any dorm? Oh yeah, absolutely. They're all accessible. I said, and what about classes? Would I get priority with scheduling? She said, well, yeah. I said, okay, well, are there certain, buildings that aren't accessible? And she kind of looked at me and smirked and said, well, no, they're all accessible. And they all have desks that they can go up and down. And there's underneath, the wheelchair could roll right underneath without an issue. So I said, and what about the shuttle on campus? She said, oh, no, it's accessible. And I said, I'm just shocked. I had no idea the campus was so accessible. And she said, well, one of the presidents was in a wheelchair and his main goal was that he wanted the university to be 100% handicap accessible into code. And it was. And not only was it completely accessible, but it had an amazing creative writing department. And they always say a college chooses you. And I guess I never really knew what that meant until I did go to the campus and I loved it. And I remember on the car ride home, I wasn't talking. And my mom's like, I don't know why you're not talking to us. And my dad said it's because she loved the school. And they were right. I went back with my brother, I remember, and we looked all around the campus. And that's when I did decide Hofstra was going to be home for me. And it ended up being home for me through graduate school. And I had made my decision and I applied early action to both and I got into both, but I ultimately decided on Hofstra. And that is when true friends are made. And I found another quote, a true friend accepts you for who you are, but also helps you become who you should be. And this is actually a picture from my wedding in 2019. And when I went to Hofstra, I was scared. I was scared of the wheelchair and being accepted by friends. And when they had an orientation and it was a 2-night, 3-day orientation, and I was just going to commute there, I wasn't going to stay the night because I didn't have anyone. It was still just my mom, but my mom said, I'll come with you. I spoke to the school. They gave me and my mom our own room within where the dorm was going to be for this orientation. And actually, Elena, who is here right now, she was in my group. We had a cohort of me, it was Elena and another person. And the two of us really hit it off. And it was the first time that I had really met someone who just saw me. And I was not just some girl in a wheelchair. We became friends. And the other two people that are there also, we were all in the same orientation group. And I remember we kind of stuck together. And when we would go to different things on the campus for the different events, since my mom was there, she would kind of take the van and go from each location to the next. And we would be walking by and they'd be like, "Is that your mom?" And her feet were out the window and she was drinking coffee. She was reading People magazine. And at the end of the orientation, there were coffee cups thrown in the back seat, every magazine of People and Us Weekly. But she wanted me to have that experience. And that experience led me to lifelong friends. And 15 years later, I would definitely say it is lifelong friends. So since I found that, and it was even just the first time where when we would go out on a Friday night, it would just be assumed we were going out in my car. Or if we would go somewhere, it was assumed the place was going to be handicap accessible. And they taught me that it was okay to be who I wanted to be. So that was really important to me. And then going back to different accommodations that I had on campus, along with great friends. Actually, that's my dorm right there. I had an automatic door opener so that when I went to the building, I was able to click the button, my dorm room would open. I didn't have a roommate, but I was in a double room for personal carries. I had priority when planning my classes, and I was close to the dining hall. So it was really easy if it was snowing, if it was raining, or whatever the case was. And I also managed a full-time course load. Not quite sure how, but I did. I was a declared English major with a concentration in creative writing, specializing in poetry. I knew what worked best for me. I did best at the afternoon classes. I didn't have night classes. I was not someone who pulled an all-nighter. I didn't have Friday classes, so I gave my body time to rest. I was extremely organized. I definitely always made sure I knew when I had reports and presentations, and I always planned accordingly. And, I was that student that when we would get a syllabus and we would have a paper due at the end of the semester, I remember once a professor said, "If you want us to read a draft, we will." And the next time I had class, I gave him the draft. And he said, "Well, what is this?" I said, "Well, it's the report that you said you would read the draft for." He said, "You mean the one due at the end of the semester?" But that was just the person that I was. I wanted to stay on top of things, and my hard work did pay off because I was accepted into the honors college at the end of my freshman year. And I was also in 2 different National Honor Societies. So then moving forward, I was also extra thankful that family was only 20 minutes away. And I remember that's my mom there. And I think my mom could probably drive to Hofstra with her eyes closed, because any time of night, if an aide couldn't be there, if an aide had to leave early, if an aide was sick, she was the one that was getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning, getting there at 11 o'clock at night. And I can remember many Friday or Saturday nights when I would come back to my dorm and I would expect to see someone else sitting in my room, and it was her. And it was because who had to go home and who was sick. But she used to not text me and say, "Okay, Laura, we have to go home now." She waited. She wanted to give me that experience and always let me have that experience. And I don't think I probably would have ever gotten through college if it wasn't for her. And there were times where, yeah, college wasn't always easy. It was hard. It was hard on my body. And I wish there was a rule book of you do all of these things and it's going to go perfect, but that's not how FOP is. And I even remember one time I was always honest with my professors, and that's why it was so important to, if I was going through a flare up, and they always knew what I needed, where I was going to be, if I was going to be late, even though I always tried not to be. And I had let a professor know that I wasn't going to be able to make it because I had to go on a 3-day IV infusion. And I finished the infusion. My mom wrapped it up and she ended up taking me to class. And when the professor walked in, he pulled me out and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm coming to class." He said, "But you told me you weren't. You had an IV infusion." I said, "Yeah, it's not a big deal. You know, my mom wraps it up. I'm good." And he left me in the hall and he went back into the classroom. He told the students he would be back in a minute. And he walked me to my car. And he said to my mom, "You better take her home. She's ahead of everything. She knows what she needs to do. You know, take her home, let her rest." And it was because who I was as a student, how I was academically, but also how I was when it came to advocacy. And always knowing that I always had a place to go and I always had a home to go to. And that was one of the really important things. And then before you knew it, it was senior year. I was at this point a published poet. I worked on campus at the disability office. So whereas we could have note takers and I could get time and a half and have tests read to me, instead of me taking part of those services, I would help deliver those services. And I became a proctor and a note taker. And I was also teaching an entry-level poetry course. I was a declared minor in psychology, and I had been admitted into the Masters of Fine Arts program. I did an 80-page portfolio of all different poems, and I was a confessional poet. So I did all different poems, and I was on track to be a poetry professor, and that was my goal. And then one day, it was February, I was graduating in May, and I was taking a special education class and a positive psychology class back to back, and it was a dreary February night. And the positive psychology professor just happened to come in one day and said, "If you don't love what you do, don't do it." And I don't think he thought that people were going to take his words so literally, but I did. And I went home and I called my parents. I said, "I can't do this. I don't want to be a poetry professor anymore." I, all throughout college, I had what was called a rehabilitation counselor. And through New York State, it's an agency called Access VR. And they help you. They're an agency for people with disabilities, and they help you financially when it comes to whatever it is that you need in order to be competitively employed, whether it's training, schooling, college, whatever the case is. And my counselor's name was Larry. And I called my parents and I said, I want to be Larry. I want to be a rehabilitation counselor. So my new career goal now in February, when I graduated in May, was rehabilitation counseling. And I found a little definition of what it is. Rehabilitation counseling is a discipline that provides counseling services to people with disabilities to help them achieve their personal, academic, and career goals. It was a 2.5-year program. And then there was a state test to become a certified rehabilitation counselor. And luckily, that degree was at Hofstra, or else my parents probably really would have killed me at that point. So I got myself into high gear. I withdrew from the Masters of Fine Arts. I interviewed with the dean. I did my letters of everything, and I wrote my essay, and I ended up getting accepted into the program. So, which was good. So I had a goal. And then before you knew it, we did it. I graduated in May of 2011. I had, as you can see, the 4 of us, we stuck together till the end. We all did it. And I graduated with the Bachelor's of Arts with a major in English and creative writing with a minor in psychology. I graduated magna cum laude. And the next step was graduate school, which was going to be at Hofstra. So graduate school, I was going to be in a new dorm that pretty much shifted back about half a block from my current dorm. And in rehabilitation counseling, I was on a special grant so that I could specialize in transition age youth, which is that 18 to 26-year-old range. Because to me, that's the most vulnerable time for somebody. I felt the most vulnerable there of, it's kind of a world out there of, well, if you don't fit the mold, what is next? How do you navigate that? And I navigated it with the help of this gentleman, Larry, and I wanted to help other people navigate it too. Even if college wasn't the right step for them, what program was going to be right for them? It was also different. It was night classes. I was not used to night classes, so it was getting used to that. And I think that took a little bit of time to get used to my body. Um, but first we had to do a 100-hour practicum, and I actually did it on Hofstra's campus. And I felt that the biggest disconnect, I was working at the disability office. The people that have disabilities on campus weren't really integrated into campus life. So with the approval of the disability office, I sent a letter out to every single person who was registered for the students with disabilities. And I started a mentoring assistance program. And I said who I was, that I was a graduate student, and I would do individual counseling, I would do group counseling. And every Wednesday at Hofstra, it was called Common Hour, and no classes happened. And that's when all clubs met and things like that. And I would take them to the Common Hour, and I would get them involved in clubs and really open it up to, there is a world, there is a college that they can be a part of. And actually that program is still going on. I kind of helped get that off the ground. And then that was one semester. And then we moved into another 2 semesters where it was 300 hours each of an internship. And I did that at what was called Nassau BOCES, which is the Board of Cooperative Educational Services. It's a state-funded program. It's a vocational trade school. And I did that, and I was a vocational assistant, pretty much what I do now. I'm the lead vocational evaluator. I was back as the assistant. I was, grading tests. I was giving the assessments. I was putting all the information into a report, not really understanding what it meant. I was still in graduate school. I was still learning, but I was working with that transition age youth. I was also in the Honor Society for Rehabilitation Counseling. And then before you knew it, it was December of 2013. I graduated magna cum laude again. I passed my certification exam, which officially made me a certified rehabilitation counselor. And then it was the next step, and it was the workforce and figuring that out. So looking for a job and interviews. Again, I knew what I wanted my focus to be, and I wanted to work with young adults who had varying forms of disabilities. If I would get a call for an interview, I was never afraid of the wheelchair. I would always ask if the location was accessible. I wouldn't get into FOP, but I would just ask if they were accessible since I utilized a wheelchair. And the biggest thing, and I think my dad always drilled this into me, was know your worth. People are going to look at you differently, whether you have a disability, you're too fat, you're too skinny, whatever the case is, people are going to think a certain thing, but you always need to be confident. And I was fortunate that I came from a family where they always showed me my worth and let me realize that I could be confident in who I was. I was smart, I was educated, I passed my certification, and I had a lot of talents. And then when I did get into the interview, the elephant in the room was FOP. There was no other way. It was the wheelchair, it was how my arms were, and I always addressed it. And because I do speaking for FOP, it's one of the things on my resume. So I would bring up FOP and I would address the elephant in the room, and I wouldn't get really that much into it, just this is what I have and I do things differently. But I always turn my limitations into a positive where, yes, I do only type with one hand, but I could type 60 words a minute. Because of my disability, I have excellent time management skills. I have excellent organizational skills. So again, that's knowing your worth and always making a limitation into a positive. So then I ended up securing employment in June of 2014 as a vocational evaluator at Nassau BOCES, where I had previously interned. And there I do what's called the diagnostic vocational evaluation, where I work with about 12 students at a time. And it's 7 to 10 days typically. And we do everything from hands-on, academic, and situational based assessments to help determine a plan for their future. And not everyone is like me who is there. It's mainly they have mental disabilities. So it's a lot of autism, learning disabilities, ADHD, mental disabilities, things of that sort. And it was amazing to see, because I do work in a vocational trade school of, well, on paper and pencil, they may not be so great, but when they go into the cosmetology room, they're absolutely unbelievable. Or they go into the auto room, and I would then gather all that data, I interpret it, I would write plans for the next steps. And then the rehabilitation agency that had helped me, they're now my coworkers. So it was a definite transition from consumer to colleague. And I would go over and I would present the last 7 days and what happened. And we would come up with a plan for their future. And it is unbelievable to see that these students that came in as 18-year-olds, pretty much to 26 is the population that I'm with. They're so scared in the beginning and don't know if there's next steps for them or what they're going to do. And throughout the 7 days, it's, you just watch them evolve and realize, hey, I can do this. There is something for me to do. And it was with my help they were getting there. And I think me being in the situation that I'm in with the limitations that I have also does show them, well, she did it, I can do it too. So I did that. And then I'm always creative. So my phone, as you can see in the bottom picture, a coworker actually painted it's my name and my husband's name and my wedding date. And it's literally a paint stick with Velcro to it attached to my phone, so that I don't have to speak on speakerphone if I have students in the room. And, you know, I can't get a headset on and off. So being as independent as I possibly can. My computer, a family friend had made, I told him the height and the dimensions that I needed, and he made me a really nice wood block on my desk that has slots in it that I could put papers on. And again, working in a voc tech school is nice, because on the bottom of my desk, you could see my desk is on risers. The construction trades class came in, they measured how I needed my desk to be, and they did whatever height I needed. And it's also within the wood so that when I do pull on it, it's safe, it's secure. I have an automatic door that goes to my classroom, so I don't have to rely on somebody else to open and close my door. And organization is key. As you can see, my desk looks pretty neat here. It's usually not that neat. But I always want to know, I try to plan my day accordingly. And it's something that I think FOP has definitely taught me, where when I go into work, I know what files I'm going to need, where I'm going to need things in order to reach it, and things like that. But again, we all know that things come up and you're going to need something that I didn't plan for. And that is, again, where my advocacy comes into play, and my coworkers are beyond amazing and help in whatever way that I possibly need. But it allows me to be as independent as I can be at work. Having just simple things like a Velcro stick, my computer up, and my desk on risers. And then that brings me to the end. I have my contact information on here. My email is laura.rossano88@gmail.com. I have my phone number, and I had also done a podcast with Hope not that long ago, where FOP is part of my life, but it isn't my life. And I do touch on college and advocacy and things like that, and go in a little bit more. So feel free to always listen to that. I know that, I think Hope is going to put it in the chat box at the end of this, and if it is on the IFOPA website. But I also too, I want you to feel free, if you ever have any questions and want to talk something out, texting, email, whatever the case is, I'm always here. I'm always here to help, share experience. Again, I want it to be as honest a conversation as possible. So that's the end of my presentation. So to say, I will get this off of the sharing screen mode so we
So
can all.
before you jump off to other topics, I think it would be good if you talked about dealing with AIDS and dealing with AIDS on your own, especially for someone that might need help, and how you handled that in a dorm where you didn't have, in terms of the bathroom situation, the showering situation, and kind of standing on your own 2 feet when it came to not having mom and dad, but rather, kind of being in charge and making sure that they knew how you wanted things?
Most definitely. And I think that was definitely a scary experience because it was letting someone else knew that wasn't mom and dad, and knowing where, yeah, I did need help with the bathroom, and where they were going to be when I did go to classes, that they were always going to be close by in case an emergency did come up where I did need assistance, and knowing how, if they had to lift me a certain way or handle me a certain way in bed, or something as simple as getting a shirt on and it had to be twisted a certain spot at the arm, that way it was the correct way on me and the most comfortable. It's those minute little details that really did help me again find my voice of, well, no, can you just, again, it's something as simple as putting a shirt on and knowing that you're putting the shirt on correctly. And even knowing when I go to classes, if it was the middle of winter and I was in a jacket, how was I going to manage that when I got to class? Was I going to keep my jacket on for the 2-hour lecture, or was I going to have someone who was going to help me and follow me there? And again, kind of navigating and realizing what worked and what didn't work for me. And what worked for me was always having them close by, making sure I would get to class. I was set up that I needed, they had took my bag, they would put the bag on the desk, and really getting me situated. And it was scary. It was definitely scary trusting somebody new. But again, new isn't always a bad thing. And it was a lot of interviews. I know that we definitely went through a lot of interviews, and, we went through a lot of different aides, but there's someone out there that you treat like family, and finding that person and training that person. And it's really just learning to find your voice too.
Does anyone else have questions they want to ask Laura before? I had a question for you, Laura, but I wanted to give people a chance. I know sometimes it's hard to put those in chat. It can take a while. So if anyone else has a question, please feel free. You can use the raise hand feature on Zoom and unmute yourself to ask. But Laura, I am curious to know, and this might be a little bit personal, but how did you handle sort of that adjustment when you realized that you were changing your career path? You had been on this course for 4 years of planning to graduate with your creative writing degree and move on to the next step of that. And then sort of, at the end, you had this realization that there was something else. And I think that I know from my own personal experience, that can be sort of like a panic feeling of, oh my goodness, like things weren't going the way that I had initially planned. And how do I react, and how do I readjust life to achieve what I want to achieve? So can you share, like, were you just immediately confident and like, yes, this is what I'm going to do? Or did you do any sort of pros and cons to weigh and make a decision? How did you kind of move forward with what can be kind of a scary situation for a lot of people, I think?
No, most definitely, especially since graduation was so soon. I think if you probably asked my brother and my parents when I did tell them about my change of career path, their response was, yeah, we thought so. Because I think everyone else knew that I was set out to help people eventually with disabilities, but I don't think I was ready to take on that challenge. I think you have to accept yourself first. And I guess getting up to the point of senior year of college, it maybe is a little embarrassing at times that you think, well, maybe I didn't fully accept who I was and my limitations, and it was a growing experience. And it takes one statement from a professor of, if you don't love what you do, don't do it. And I think in the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to help people with disabilities, but I didn't know in what path. But I did also love writing, and the two fields, they do go hand in hand, because it does give me the creative outlet too of, I do things differently. Someone else might have to do something differently. And I pretty much knew right away that I wanted to be a rehabilitation counselor. It wasn't that I thought possibly a career in psychology. I pretty much knew. I was fortunate in that aspect that I had an idea, and it was also at Hofstra. But it was just trusting your gut to follow it through. And I was fortunate that I had everybody on my side of being a support for me of, yeah, you can do this. And I still have the creative writing on. I still do a lot of writing. I mean, my reports are 12 pages long. So it's definitely a lot of that plus that counseling aspect. So
And I'll jump in and say that my dad and I would joke about how it's like, Laura, what are you doing? Like, this is, and she's like, oh, no, I have to do this. So it's also a certain amount of, you have to let that growth happen, for those on here that are, have children with it or family members, like you have a certain amount of, you still have to make your own mistakes. You still have to, discover yourself and find your own voice as you come full circle, because especially in college, I mean, how many of us made poor life decisions at some point in time and had to right that ship in different ways? But again, then it also teaches you lessons along the way, where then you become better at the other side, and you've learned, hey, I made that mistake, it's okay, and you've grown in different ways. So that was also a way that she got some additional support, because we told her that this was going to happen regardless.
yeah.
Well, and Laura, I can't help but think how, sometimes you have to push through those challenging moments, but like how much more fulfilling and rewarding your life is now as a vocational evaluator than it might have been if you had just stayed in what was safe to just graduate with creative writing and go down that path.
Well, Laura,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, you can also touch upon the things that were in your dorm that helped you be successful, what access provided in the dorms for you, how you were allowed to bring in we had a full-size bed instead of the dorm bed, and the
Right,
table.
absolutely. So because it was, I do need help at night. I do need assistance at night with turning, and turning on a twin bed is not easy. So we brought in a full bed. I also, and again, Access VR, the state agency, they're all about getting you what you need in order to do your job as independently as you can in order to get to that end goal. So one of the things that I did have, because of my range of motion, I had a desk that had 2 different levels on it with a crank. So I could make the computer screen higher and I could make the spot where I write lower. So I had that in the dorm room. So there were different things where it was able to help me. I had also the opportunity to get a laptop because, writing, I might not be able to write as fast. So I would bring a laptop with me to class. That way I was able to write down notes and things like that to email to myself to make my life easier. That way I wasn't carrying these big clunky notebooks around with me. I had, a notepad that was a computer that was able to help me.
Laura, I had a question for you about your work as a vocational evaluator. So I don't know if you can speak to a little more detail about how you help the clients you work with sort of make their decisions. If we have parents on here who maybe have some younger children who are getting ready to go through college, or who are starting to think about what path they want to take. I know college is one option, but there are other choices to pursue as well. So can you share from a professional sort of lens how you help families navigate that choice?
I'm always very realistic. And I think because I did grow up with my parents and my brother always having those honest conversations, and, I'll get someone in and, they'll say, well, I want to be the big one. They all want to be game designers. That's what they want to do. They want to be game designers. So I take that goal and you work with that goal. Okay, well, you want to work with games. How are you on a computer? How are you on troubleshooting? And then they explore something else. Well, I really like that troubleshooting. And it kind of snowballs. Well, you can go to a trade school for that. And it's a short-term trade school, and you can go into computers in the IT world. Oh, well, I didn't know that existed. And I think a lot of it is a career exploration. And I always say when they come in, you know that you want to be a vet tech, great. But why don't you try something? I rather at the end of the day, I meet with my students all the time. I rather you be Laura, I absolutely hated it, than us sitting in a meeting where you say, well, I might have been interested in it. So I try to always take their passion and then again, be creative with it of, well, someone who wants to work in the auto field, but they don't have a license, which is one of the requirements. And, they might not have the hand dexterity to do it or the physical ability to do it, but they love being organized. So you can take that into the auto shop. You could work in an auto store. You could do the computers for them. You could do the books for them. So it's really being creative and a lot of career exploration. And that's one of the big things that I do without the students that I work with is just exploring different things, because a lot of times either parents, caregivers don't realize that there are other opportunities out there than just one particular goal, where that goal is game designer might be the umbrella, but there are a lot of different offshoots that you could go with it that are more feasible at that time.
Can I just break in for a second and say that in New York State, because of Access VR, if you so choose to go to any college that you're able to get into, it's 100% free ride if you go to a state college.
Mhm.
And while I wouldn't make a blanket statement like that across the country, I will tell you that any college that has the ability to accept a disabled student has the ability to run a program that would be a benefit for anyone with FOP. And most colleges that are progressive and forward thinking like to use the resources they have to create new programs. This is a situation where Hofstra already had this program, and they were very conscious of what goes into a program like this. It was enhanced by Laura and other disability students, but there are plenty of universities out there that will do the same thing. And it's important to reach out to them. And it's important to reach out to your state university system, no matter where you are in the United States.
Well, and I know we also have people from Italy and Ireland and Argentina on this call. So I would encourage you, Access VR, Access Vocational Rehab is what the VR part stands for, to explore in your country or in your city, state, like, are there vocational rehab resources or programs available? No. So I had another question for you, Laura. So this is something I don't think that we have really spoken about before, but you mentioned that, you wanted to be a lawyer, but the hours for caseloads and things like that are really long. And so sort of the physical tax that plays doesn't pair up well with FOP. Have you considered, or were there careers where you were thinking about like the mental or emotional stress or demands of jobs? And I guess how you have great perseverance. I guess I would say you're just one of the strongest people I feel like I've gotten to know. And so as someone who is so strong, do you weigh the mental or sort of the emotional stress of your job? Maybe that comes into play, and how do you manage that part of it, knowing that that can also impact FOP as well, your mental health?
Oh, most definitely. And I definitely don't deserve the credit. It's the other people on the screen that deserve the credit. It's my brother, it's my dad, it's my mom, and they're the reason why I'm here today and gave me the perseverance and taught me everything. So it's because of them. And I think having, number one, a support system is by far huge. And of course, I did try to work full time within the voc rehab field, but I was getting flare up after flare up after flare up. And you have to realize where we did, again, had to have an honest discussion of, you can't keep going down this path. And working full time was just not in the cards for me. Again, it's hard. It's hard being in your 30s and you want to work full time and you want, that high salary paying job, but realistically, it wasn't in the cards. And my family has always taught me, whatever cards you're dealt with, you're going to play them the best possible way that you can. And at work, is there emotional stress right now at work? Do I come home and I've had a day and it's been stressful and, I'm overwhelmed with everything that I have to do. Absolutely. It wouldn't be a career if you didn't have that stress. I don't think anyone here could say they've never had stress on their job before or bad days, but it's having the people around you that pick you up. And have I given myself a flare up because of stress? Absolutely. And I deal with it accordingly. And I still continue on. And sometimes I do realize of, really again, having those honest conversations of, well, maybe there's a reason why I'm getting this flare up, or, I'm grinding my teeth at night, affecting my job because I'm so stressed out, and really trying to work past that for the sake of my health. And again, being a lawyer, they could all tell you I love to argue. But realistically, it just like working full time. I have a great schedule. I work Monday through Thursday from 9:15 to 2:45 because again, you need to take into account, I do need help with things. I do need help with the restroom. Sometimes when I do work until 4 o'clock at night, the first thing is, well, okay, when's there going to be a break in the day that either my mom can come, an aide can come and, kind of break away to go to the restroom. So there's all these things that, the average person isn't thinking when they go to work, and that I need to think about. Do I need to leave work every time I have to use the restroom? No, you need to find a way to work with it and go within it and figure it out. And again, we're still figuring it out. It's still a learning curve.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message to convey, because I have to admit, Laura, when you meet you, you're so incredibly on top of it all. It feels like you've been this way from day one. And so I want people to know that it is a journey, that you don't start off with the perfect system, that you learn as you go. And I think I appreciate you being willing to share about sort of your journey to learn to balance the mental health demands of your job and FOP, because I think the mental health and FOP connection is so rarely discussed. But I think it's a very powerful one. And so just, hearing that you were working full-time and you realized that working part-time just was a better fit for you. I'm glad that people can hopefully take that away and know that with whatever job you pursue or whatever career you're in, to give yourself that flexibility.
And I think it's those, just coming back is having those honest conversations. Cause I think sometimes you want to bury your head in the sand, but it's good to have that communication, because communication is going to be key throughout the whole process. And again, it's okay to do 4 classes or 3 classes and maybe pick up an extra one over the summer. So you don't have that workload during that period, so I think you have to be honest with yourself terms of what you can handle, but then as a caretaker's perspective and a family member, you have to be like, well, what are you doing to yourself? Like, and it's hard because you have to have a conversation where you see they want to drive, you see they want to push forward, but for their own benefit, you have to say, you really shouldn't. And this is why. And if you don't, it'll prolong you, it'll put you in a position of success over the longer term instead of trying to drive too hard at the beginning.
And one of the things I also think, when we would have conversations with Laura about careers, we were also very realistic on careers. And as much as you could say you can be anything you want, when you have FOP, you really can't. There are limitations. And I think you have to be very honest and open with those limitations. And picking, like she wanted to be a lawyer, and can you do the hours? Can you really work full time? Even Laura thought about a school teacher, and we thought, okay, school teacher, that might be good. You're off for the summer. So you try to pick a path that, because we all know that FOP can be a very aggressive, progressive disease. You're 23 right now, and 15 years from now, are you going to be able to be in the same path? Can you still do the same job? So when it did come to a path for her to take, we did try to have open, honest lots of crying conversations.
I was just about to say, they were not easy conversations.
No, they
and
weren't.
They were hard, and it left me mad, it left me angry, and it definitely made me take a minute, but you realize that they're right. And FOP, as much as you might want to bury your head in the sand with it, you can't, because it is so up on the forefront. And learning how to navigate that while being as successful as you can, as smart as you can, taking in the limitations and knowing what you're capable of.
Those are great points from everyone. Thank you. Laura, I have another question that is a little more specific to the US, and I know it's not your specialty, but I think it's an important point to address that some of our community members, maybe, they've kind of passed that high school graduation phase, and they were either going through a flare up or had something that prevented them from immediately searching for a career or a vocation. And I think for some of our community members, they are on government benefits, and then they become fearful because they feel like they rely on those benefits, and pursuing a job could jeopardize that. So what advice do you have for people who maybe are trying to figure out the financial aspect of working with a disability and protecting some of the income they may be getting from benefits, that earning additional funds could cause them to need to shift around?
No, most definitely. And I mean, I can really only speak to New York. I know New York the best. There are definitely financial planners that you can go to that are better versed in this. But as far as you sending in paychecks, there's a certain threshold. And I think that's what people forget. People think, okay, the moment I start working and get a career, my benefits are going to be taken away. There's a threshold, there's a formula. And, as long as you stay within that particular formula, and I know that I deal with students right out of college, and, you may be 35 years old, 40 years old. I just had a gentleman who was, 69 in my assessment. So it doesn't matter what the age is. For Access VR, they follow you pretty much anytime. It's not just at high school. And, kind of looking where I don't want the government funding to be held as a crutch, because there are ways around it. There are ways to protect your money. There are ways to protect yourself. Sometimes I think my dad is better when it comes to that than I am. He's the financial person, but there are things that you can do, and there's protocols. I mean, go to the Social Security office, have those conversations, seek out representation for it, because it doesn't mean you have a job, you're losing everything.
Yeah, obviously, this is United States wide. The Social Security Administration has a threshold, and if you make $50 a week, that probably doesn't reduce your benefits a hell of a lot. So you get a certain stipend, and working is not so much for the money. I think in general, when you really like what you do, it makes your life more fulfilling. So I think sometimes people have a tendency to say, I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough money to live. And that's not the case. The government has some weird rules, believe me, and we've been through a lot of them. But where there's a will, there's a way. And it's very important. If you work 10 hours a week, so you might get a few dollars less for the month, you're still getting money from working those 10 hours, and you're getting a hell of a lot of self-esteem that makes a big difference about your life. And I would suggest anybody who wants to achieve something new, they shouldn't let the fact that benefits might be a little bit of a stumbling block cause them to stop.
Most definitely.
I think taking the disability check is a very easy route for people to take. But it's like he said, and what Laura, your self-esteem of going out there and working, even if it's not full-time, if it's part-time, we deal with Social Security officers way too much. It gets very frustrating, and you can get very angry, but it's something that if you want to do it, you do it, and you try to plan your life
Find a way.
accordingly.
Laura, I loved your recommendation, and I really wanted to make sure to encourage people, whether you're an individual with FOP or a caregiver, if you can outsource some of your responsibilities to other people, that is protecting your mental health, it's protecting your time. So Laura mentioned a financial needs planner. Or a financial planner. There are special needs financial planners who have a ton of experience in understanding every state's limitations and helping you be able to identify places like ABLE accounts. If you're in the US and you're familiar with ABLE accounts or special needs trusts, those are two very valuable sort of pockets to put your money in to help you be able to still qualify or stay eligible for different support that you need. So Laura, I appreciate you bringing that resource in, because I do think, it's sometimes we get so overwhelmed with things that it's hard to remember that there are people out there who can help us. And we have a couple different webinars on the IFOPA YouTube channel, one by a special needs financial planner that I'll put in the chat below, but don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions about that aspect.
Oh, absolutely.
Does anyone else have any questions? Or I guess, Laura, are there any kind of closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Honestly, you need to do what's going to make you happy, and to be too scared to get out that you're going to be discriminated against or people are going to judge you. It's getting over that. It's the elephant in the room, and realizing that you have a support system at home and you can do it, and you have the education to do it. You have the capability of doing it, and whatever you do, you're going to be the best in your field. And, my parents have always instilled in myself and my brother of, whatever you do, you better make sure you're the best at it. And I like to think the two of us are, and you figure it out and you learn, and finding resources. And I think a lot of times there's fear of learning a resource. And again, this is for the US. Every single state in the United States has a vocational rehab department in order to help them. And again, Social Security statewide. And just finding out those questions rather than putting yourself on the bench before trying it, because it's never too late. It's not that you have to have something, and if you don't get it done by the age of 18, it's never going to happen. It could happen at any age. You just have to be ready and in the mindset for it, and to, again, be honest with yourself and know your body and know what you can do and what your limitations are, and finding it. If it's going and saying, you know what, I want to get my associate's degree and I want to take 2 classes a semester, do it. Don't have the fear of it. Do it. Challenge yourself, because it does it. Even when I do assessments with my students in the beginning, they're scared, they don't know, and then they come into my assessment, then they go into a training program, and then you call 90 days, and I was just on the phone, and it's like, they're in a school, they're working there as a janitor, they're a custodian, and it's like the pride that they have, and whereas maybe a year before that they wouldn't have been so sure. So always taking that first step, because it literally just takes one step in order to change your life.
Thank you, Laura, and to the whole Rossano family who has showed up in big ways today. It's been wonderful to meet you all and to have all of your input as well, because Laura, you've said this multiple times that you need that social support. You need a support network there to help you navigate through all of the different phases and aspects of life with FOP. So thank you to all.